What is up, Bills Mafia? I am breaking in from my vacation here in beautiful Orlando, Florida. I am at our vacation house, just about a 10-minute drive outside of Disney World. We got 3 days down. We got 2 more park days to go. And lucky me, the Bills decided to have one of the most historic news days in Bills history on our off day. It was our pool day. So I've been grinding for the last couple of hours from Florida, and now we are about to get into all of what happened today right here on the emergency podcast episode of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. I'm Matt Parrino. He is Ryan Talbot. What's up, brother?
It's a crazy day, Matt Parrino. The Bills currently have more punters on their rosters than safeties. I don't know what to think of it.
I'm sure that's probably got Sean McDermott panicked in some way. He's a safety guy. But listen, that's what happens, when the Bills kind of got themselves into this crazy cap situation that they have been in over the last couple of months. And we've been talking about the ways that they can open up some space. And they really got into it today. And so let's go. I want to go through the cuts from today first. And I want to kind of rate them in order. And I'm sorry, people are saying you're so bright. Yeah, I got my Walter White Disney World shirt on. I got my Guardians of the Galaxy cap on. My son picked it out. Great stuff, Lucas. Shout out to you, buddy. He's been on one. Dude, we did the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Walt Disney World. Oh my God, Epcot changed the game. It was the most unbelievable thing I've ever been on. But we'll get to that later. So tre'davious White, Buffalo Bills cornerback, first draft pick of Sean McDermott, released. That is going to be marked as a post-June 1st cut. The Bills are going to get about $10 million in cap savings after June 1st. So you're not even counting that in the number that Spot Track has out. We'll get to that in a moment. They've released Jordan Poyer. I think of the moves today, of the big name moves, that was the one that was probably most likely. People have been talking about that for weeks. It opens up about $5 million in cap space. The one that really shocked people earlier in the day, Ryan, Mitch Morse, he gets released. And the plan reportedly is to move Connor McGovern over to center. They signed David Edwards to a 2-year contract. He is going to play left guard. But Mitch Morse, who has started in front of Josh Allen for the past 5 seasons, no longer on the roster. I mean, those are 3 franchise cornerstones, franchise staples over the past, this era of Bills football, now off the roster. We'll get into a couple of the more depth guys that were released today, but let's start with those 3 from the jump. Which one surprised you most here today?
Yeah, it would be Mitch Morse for me. And I know $8.5 million savings in cap space by relieving him is nothing to scoff at. It makes a lot of sense. But it was the most surprising because the Bills just traded Ryan Bates away earlier in the week for a 5th round pick. And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe that means Mitch Morse is going to be here in 2024 and beyond. They might rework the deal. They might figure something out to make both parties happy. And, you said it, how important he's been to this team, this offensive line, this offense. And now you look at Buffalo's offensive line. This was one of the healthiest groups in the league last year. They played together all season long. Now it's completely different, and we haven't even hit free agency yet. So you have a new center with McGovern sliding over. You have David Edwards competing for a guard spot. You obviously have your tackles the same. You still have Osiris Torrance, but you're shuffling and you're playing with fire, so to speak, because it's no guarantee that 1, they're going to stay this healthy again this upcoming season like they did 1 year ago, and 2, it's not just so easy to slide from guard to center. And we don't know what McGovern's going to be able to do. Maybe he'll be a pleasant surprise. Maybe he'll be great there. And maybe when we look back on this show, we'll say, this is why Brandon Beane gets paid the big bucks. He knew exactly what he was doing. But this shuffles the deck a little bit with the offensive line. And it makes you wonder, are they going to be players in the draft with all these draft picks in terms of maybe addressing the center position in case it doesn't work with Connor McGovern? Then they could kick him back to guard. So among the big moves today, it was Mitch Morse. It was what he meant to this team. Loved in the locker room, great play on the field. He's not the most powerful center, but the athleticism was there. And he played at a high level throughout his entire tenure with the Bills.
Yeah, it's definitely Morse to me that's the most surprising, because if you rewind the clock 1 month, remember, we were talking about this a month ago as Tre'davious White being a realistic cut candidate for the Bills, a cap casualty, that you just get yourself into a situation. Like, look at the cornerbacks room, right? Like, I know that there's a lot of emotion running across Bill's Twitter and Bill's social media today, and rightfully so. I mean, this is a guy, like, I picked the photo when I was putting together the cover art for today's show, and I grabbed the one of Tre'davious White from, I can't remember the game, but remember when the play sheet kind of blew across the field and Trey White ran over there and comically picked it up and
Against
tried
the
to kind of act
Ravens,
like
I
he was
think.
at the Ravens. Yes, kind of like acting like he was reading the plays. The whole Trey White goalie academy. I mean, if you want to talk about a guy that embraced the city before it was cool to embrace the city, a guy coming from a top program in LSU and had to kind of be a part of the build from the hard days of it all and became like a fixture of the culture, an example of the culture, just as much as guys like Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. I know it's been kind of forgotten a little bit over the last couple of years because he hasn't been out there. He's only played 10 games. He's already started 10 regular season games since that first injury in Detroit on Thanksgiving a couple of years ago, 2 serious injuries over the last couple of years. I get all that emotion, and it's deservedly so. I mean, Trey White has been about as fun of a person to cover, player to cover. But look at that cornerback room, Ryan. They have a guy that they're bringing back. They've restructured Rasul Douglas's contract. He's in the last year in 2024. So he's a guy that you pencil in or you put in pen as a starter coming back. He was that much of a difference maker in terms of turning the ball over. I thought Christian Benford down the stretch looked to me like cornerback 1 on this roster. He was that good. I actually went back and looked at the stats. He finished the season when the Bills needed it, not only to get into the playoffs, but to secure the AFC East and give themselves a better position. He had his best 2 games of the year against the Patriots and then against the Dolphins with the division on the line. Over 90 coverage grades from PFF in those 2 games. I thought he was as good as a defensive player on the field. So when now you have this depth at the position, Kaiir Elam with a new cornerbacks coach in Jamil Adai coming from Miami, and maybe like kind of writing a new story for him, I think you could draft a guy. You still have Jamarcus Ingram, who you like as a developmental player. I think you're really good at corner, and the money is just too great, not only for this year, but moving into the future, not to kind of shuffle the deck here. And that's what the Bills have done by moving on from Tre'davious White.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because of what he meant to this team. Again, Sean McDermott's first pick is the head coach of the Bills. He takes Trey White. Trey White comes along, develops into a lockdown cornerback, plays at a high level. But unfortunately, with the nature of the business, 2 serious injuries the past 2 seasons, it just made too much sense to release him. It made all the sense in the world to release him with the post June 1st designation. You and I have both been on the record in terms of that being the likeliest outcome. And while maybe it doesn't help the Bills so much now, it's going to help them be very healthy cap-wise in 2025 and beyond. And like you said, right now they like their cornerback room. They have Rasul Douglas, who restructured his deal. They have Christian Benford. They have Taron Johnson still, obviously, in the nickel spot. Kaiir Elam, you mentioned. And then this is a draft where it wouldn't shock me with one of their currently 11 picks if they add to that depth, add to that position, and try to find some other guys that they can develop and bring along that they feel good about. But right now, that position is still pretty healthy. It's still pretty strong. You want to have people that are up and ready to go because, like you said, Rasul Douglas, great, but he has 1 year left on the deal. He's 30. You want to be thinking long-term, but right now that cornerback room is still pretty strong.
The Bills started off this week with the trade of Ryan Bates, which I think is a great indication of what they feel about their offensive line group, that they're willing to move on from both of their centers in the same week. And I think you bring up a great point there in that they have all of this draft capital to be strategic about how they want to acquire the players that they need to kind of replenish the ranks. Like we've seen so many teams. The Detroit Lions, to me, are the modern model of building a solid roster. Obviously, they got their quarterback in a little bit of a different way, but they've accumulated draft capital, and they've had mountains of picks and have hit on a number of those picks. And there's been starters that they found in back-to-back drafts that I think are going to continue to be the model moving forward. And I think Brandon Beane's kind of pushing in that direction. And Mitch Morse has been so good for them, but the more you sit with this decision, the more you understand that, okay, they found really good players flipping from year to year. That's one thing that I think gets undersold during the Bean era is how much he's reimagined this offensive line year after year. And it hasn't always been perfect, but they found a way to make it incrementally better when they went the free agency route. Then last year, they drafted Osiris Torrance, which I thought was a big move. Obviously, they brought in McGovern. Moving on from Morse is a little bit of a risk because you really solidified things up front in front of Josh Allen. But I think this is also a vote of confidence for Allen that no matter who you bring in to play center, and it looks like it's going to be McGovern moving over, somebody who played some center in Dallas, played some center in college. I think they're confident in that move. And don't forget, this is something that I took issue with on social media today. People talking about David Edwards getting this 2-year extension. He's a Bills free agent, so obviously that could happen before the start of free agency. Like he was somehow slotting into Ryan Bates's role. Like he was the top interior offensive lineman on this roster over Ryan Bates because when McGovern went down in the playoff game, it was Edwards who came off the bench.
Yeah. So, you mentioned this is a unit that's been getting better incrementally. You have David Edwards, who could now be in line to start. You have Alec Anderson, who can play all over the line. You have Ryan Vandemark. They're developing these young players. And, as much of a change as there's been, Matt, this offseason, now with the players, but also with the coaching staff, the one good thing is this offensive line coach is still going to be here, Aaron Kromer. And we saw what this O-line did from year 1 to year 2. And now you have 11 O-linemen under contract. Most of them are going to be entering year 2 or year 3 of Kromer's system. So you expect them to continue to improve, continue to get better, and you keep chipping away at it. This doesn't mean that they have to go out and draft a center in round 1. They could get a guy early on day 3, late on day 2. That could be the heir apparent or could eventually be the starter maybe in 2025 at center or just more depth. They're always looking for depth. If there's one thing that Brandon Beane has done throughout his tenure here as GM, he's added in the trenches, both O-line and D-line. There's always a ton of bodies there at camp, a ton of competition. I expect more of the same. I expect them to keep trying to replenish that room. But you feel confidence because Kromer's back. You saw the gains that they made from year 1 to year 2. You still have your bookends at tackles, and you're just hoping that the interior holds up. You expect Osiris Torrance to take that next step. You hope that McGovern's sliding over to center, though, that it's a smooth transition.
So I got to bring this up. My wife texted it to me, and I think this is so awesome that you remember this. My favorite Tre'Davious White moment was during the COVID era when we were doing all of our press conferences with the players over Zoom. And for whatever reason, I think I was home with the kids and my son was doing school in his bedroom in first grade. And it was just, you remember those days, Ryan? It was just
I remember.
Disaster. Yeah. I mean, you were doing it in more ways than one, like the teaching and the having 2 kids in virtual school. And so it was just a disaster. And I was late to get onto the press conference. And so Tre'Davious White comes up and I had a question that I was asked. I was doing a story on it. So I pull up. I was only going to go with my audio and keep my camera off. But for whatever reason, I hit my camera and there Tre'Davious White gets a front row ticket into my bedroom and my unmade bed because I was running around all morning. And the first thing out of his mouth is, Matt, come on, man, make your bed. What are you doing? And it was just this kind of funny reaction. I'm like, come on, Trey, man, give me a break here. It's been a busy day. It's been a messy kind of day. But we had a little fun. And listen, the thing about Trey White that's interesting is over the last couple of years, we've seen a little bit of I don't want to say a change, but he's just been in a different place mentally, right? And I think when you get to a point in your career and you're the best at what you do, and that gets tested with these injuries, it's so debilitating. And I almost feel like you saw that play out. And I think, there's an uphill battle to Trey White getting back to the level of health that he'd need to be at to be worth what he was making. That player that got that extension making $16, $17 million a year, that's not the same player that we watched last year in Trey White. And that's a shame because he's still a really good player. But in the NFL, you have to make really tough business decisions. And this is one of them. I felt like they really had to make this decision. That's why I said it a month ago. They make the decision. The other tough one was Jordan Poyer. and you're now potentially going into next season, Ryan, without your all-pro safety duo that's played together for the last 7 years. The Bills add $5 million in salary cap space, and we're going to go over all the numbers. I'm going to read you through everything. But before we get to some of that, give me your reaction to the Bills moving on from Poyer today.
Yeah, Poyer definitely hurts because the uncertainty with Micah Hyde, was he coming back? What's the plan? Was he going to re-sign? Is he going to retire? You thought, well, you still have Jordan Poyer in that safety room to work with, maybe a rookie, maybe a young player that they could sign in free agency. And now the only safeties that Bills fans have come to know under Sean McDermott in terms of that starting safety duo, they might both be gone. Micah Hyde could still obviously return. But Poyer, it's over for the Bills. And Poyer was so important to this team in so many ways, Matt. And I think he embodied what Sean McDermott was looking for. When he took over this Bills team, they were a team that couldn't get over the hump. They couldn't make the playoffs. They were, I'm not saying Jordan Poyer was the Bills were a laughingstock at that point. Mm-hmm. Jordan Poyer at that point in his career really had nothing to show for his career because he had the laceration injury in with the Browns. But Sean McDermott saw something in him from a playing perspective, from a culture perspective, from a person perspective. And on the same day, it might have been the same tweet when they announced signing Micah Hyde, they announced signing Jordan Poyer. And, I think a lot of people at that time were using Google to look up Jordan Poyer and to see who this player was. And now in 2024, everyone knows that name because he became one of the most elite safeties in this league. He changed the culture at One Bills Drive. He had that leadership that Sean McDermott was looking for from on both sides of the ball. Anything that you could ever ask for Jordan Poyer or from Jordan Poyer, he did it and then some. So both, Sean McDermott was a relative unknown when the Bills hired him. Jordan Poyer was a relative unknown when they signed him. And now you sit here and you say a lot of the success the Bills have had over these past few years, a lot of it has to do thanks to Jordan Poyer.
Let me get your thoughts on this, Ryan, because looking at all these guys that have been such a big part of building the culture and building the successful era that they've been in, what do you think about clearing out some of the cobwebs of, and listen, this is going to sound harsh, but of failure over the last couple of years and starting fresh in a lot of areas where you don't have a lot of those skeletons in the closet. And I'm not only talking from a free agency period, but young guys coming in to kind of experience the league and the playoffs and all of those kinds of things for the first time. You don't have as much of the, skins on the wall, if you will, in a bad way, because there's been so much heartbreak for this group together. I almost feel like kind of making this clean break from this era of the Bills, as hard as it might be like, a rebirth in a way for this team and maybe allowing Josh Allen to even step into more of a leadership role with what he knows, what he's kind of evolved into, but now moving it forward into what it needs to be to get over the hump in some of those big games against a few familiar foes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Alpha Omega here in the chat says, need fresh, hungry players, new blood. Not so much the hungry players. I think a lot of the Bills players are still hungry for that championship, but getting younger is important. Bring in players that haven't necessarily experienced this heartbreak over the past few years and everything this team has gone through. I think that's a big thing as well. So I like that talking point. I like the fact that, you don't want to change the culture, but you want to bring in new players, new bodies, people that can maybe help you get over the hump that you haven't been able to do here these past few years. It's a new chapter. It's a new time for this team, both in terms of maybe the roster building, obviously the stadium construction. So it might just be time.
Couple other moves to get into here quickly. The Bills, this was last week, but they released Nyheim Hines. I think that comes with about a $5 million cap savings. Tyler Matakevich was also, or he's going to come with a dead cap hit. They didn't release him. He's a free agent.
Right.
But the list on the dead cap that the Bills are bringing into this season, and it's going to be even more when this Trey White deal kind of hits post June 1st. And we'll explain that. Let's actually take a second to explain that. So Tre'davious White gets he's going to get released, but when they make that move, Ryan, it's reportedly going to come with a post June 1st designation. And so what that means is the Bills can get back more cap space if they do it after June 1st than if they were to do it now. So that means the savings that they're going to get, that's not actually going to impact the start of free agency when you're seeing a lot of these big time moves. Because that's one of the big questions that keeps coming back is like, okay, the Bills are doing all these moves and you're seeing all these numbers floated around. Does that mean that they're necessarily going to be able to make some big time splashy moves in free agency? Probably not. And here's the thing, Ryan, I don't know if you want to, because I don't think all these moves are just for 2024. I think these are for 25 and 26 and trying to somehow right now reshuffle the deck and start fresh and maybe try to like bring some health to this cap moving forward. So you're going to see that cap space kind of balloon up here at post June 1st.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I don't think they're going to be big time players in free agency this year. They're going to get under the cap. They're going to have maybe a decent amount of space where you can get some of those tier 2, tier 3 players if the price is right, if the market drops a little bit, but they're not going to be out there on day one necessarily. I'd be shocked if they were, at least going after some of these premier players that are going to hit the market. Although a lot of those big names were tagged or, re-signed with their respective teams ahead of free agency. I think realistically, though, the Bills are going to be in a really good spot for 2025 in terms of cap space, in terms of what they can do. And I kind of like the challenge of what they're going to have to do in 2024, though. You're not going to make a lot of splashy moves, probably. You're going to bring in some veterans. You're going to use a lot of those picks to sign rookies. And you're going to tell a lot of those young players, Matt, you're going to have to grow on the field. You're going to have to play quite a bit for this team, especially on the defensive line, defensive tackle, maybe coming off the edge. You're going to have to play a lot maybe in the safety room. Someone that might get drafted might be wide receiver too. The list kind of goes on. And you're going to experience growing pains, and it's going to be frustrating at times. But you look at what the Chiefs did 2 years ago when they went with a lot of young players and they went through growing pains in season, but it all paid off at the end of the year. That's what Buffalo kind of needs to do at this point. They have to hit on their draft picks. Easier said than done, obviously, especially when you're picking late in every round. But with 11 picks, if you don't feel like there's room for 11 players, which there's not, obviously, you can move up maybe in round 2 and attack a position. Maybe you can maneuver around a little bit here. I'm not saying the Bills are going to make some huge move in the draft to jump up into the top 10 or something like that. But on day 2, they can move around and get a few top 90 players that will help now and help in the future. So I think long-term, 2025, they might be able to be some player in free agency to a certain extent. But in 2024, they're going to still have to be pretty smart about how they spend their money. They're going to have to address a lot of needs, bring in a lot of players, because right now there's a lot of holes on this roster.
There is a ton of people watching right now, Ryan. This is I think this is going to break our all-time record for live viewing on one of our podcasts. We're almost at 3,000 people across the 3 live platforms watching live. Shout at Buffalo Bills Football Podcast. Man, thank you so much to everybody watching. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. I want to take this moment. We're going to get into the Von Miller renegotiated contract here in a second. But before we do, a couple of housekeeping items. We have live shows coming up in the month of March and 2 in the month of April. So get out your calendar, mark these dates down. March 16th, we're going to be at Wingnuts, 1402 Millersport Highway. That's a little bit over a week. And we are going to bring you our post free agency, week 1 of free agency live show. We'll talk about all of what's going on in the NFL, in free agencies, some of the Bills free agents that are hitting the market. That show will be a big one a week from Saturday. And then April 3rd, we are going to be at Two Knives inside of the Whirly Golf Dome. That is a Wednesday night. It's during spring break. Come out. It's our first ever live show from that location. It is so awesome. We'll have more details. I'll make the event pages up over at Facebook. And we're so excited about both of those shows, Ryan.
Excited about both shows. Obviously, as you're seeing today, this is going to be a new look roster in 2024 in many areas. So join us at both shows as we talk about free agency. We talk about the draft and how the Bills can try to once again repeat as AFC East champions, but also try to make some noise this year to remain among the AFC elite and maybe contend for a Super Bowl.
I've gotten a lot of messages today about the Shout Buffalo Bills insider text line. And we have a couple of people that have subscribed to the text line in the last hour because of all of our insiders standing us on social media. And we so appreciate that. What the Shout text line is, basically, Ryan, is they have access, Bills fans that sign up, to you and to me via text message. You could send a message. You could send a question. We give out all of our analysis first on the text insider line. So what we think about all these moves today, we've already given our first thoughts on all of those things to our insiders, which the Shout text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Beyer, proud sponsor of the show. Give Carrie some love. Attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro. He's located at 237 Main Street, Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give him a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com. All right, let's get to Von Miller here, Ryan. And the Bills have renegotiated Von Miller's contract. And this is really important when it comes to the details, because I know a lot of people were hoping for Miller to get cut. We talked about this with Mike Giannetti a few weeks ago. That was never going to really be the case. The suggestion by Mike then was to come to the table, barring some development off the field. But we heard from Brandon Beane last week, and the Bills feel like they're in a really good spot with what they know about the situation that happened with Von Miller during the bye week last week. So the option here was to come to the table with Von Miller, renegotiate the contract. And according to Ian Rappaport, they've reworked the contract. So it lowers the $17.14 million base this season to $1.5 million plus a $7 million signing bonus for a total of $8.5 million this year. And they've put a ton of incentives that could get him even higher than the $17 million he was supposed to make this season. But basically, it gives the Bills $8 million in cap space right off the jump here, and it doesn't restructure the deal. So the important part of this to remember, it's not going to affect them long-term like it has in previous years when they've reworked the contract and moved stuff down the line. This is actually Von Miller coming to the table and saying, okay, it wasn't great last year. I finished with no sacks. I played in this many games. Let's rework this deal. Let's put the organization in a healthier spot cap-wise. It's basically like he's coming to the table like, I want to win. I want to come back and prove it. And that's what kind of this whole thing shows me at the very least.
Yeah, first and foremost, the Bills should still be able to get out of this contract at the end of this 2024 season if Von Miller does not return to form, which, I don't know if he'll ever be the Von Miller of old. But to your point, this was also Von Miller saying, I did not produce last season. I missed some time. I just didn't look like myself. There's the off the field headache that he brought in terms of the media presence to this team. So he sat down with this team. He reworks the deal. He gets the Bills over $8 million in cap space. He wants them to compete. Maybe that allows him to bring back his friend Leonard Floyd or a younger player like AJ Epinesa. Who knows? Time will tell. But this was a move that needed to be made. And kudos to Von Miller for being willing to renegotiate, because the way that his contract is, he didn't have to come to the table. He knew that he was pretty safe on this roster in 2024, but he did that to free up some money for this team to let them get healthier. And I'm sure there was healthy conversations on both sides with Brandon Beane, bring up some of those points. Like you said, we're not in a good spot right now. We're not necessarily getting that return on investment that we were expecting when we signed you. What can you do for us? And sure enough, they were able to come to some kind of middle ground.
And I'm not surprised about this at all. I mean, if you talk about two guys that have a great relationship, Von Miller, Brandon Beane, that's the key to something like this is two guys that have a lot of respect for each other. Von has been kind of shadowing Beane over the last couple of years because he wants to become a general manager when he's done. And so I think those conversations were always going to be easy. And I think he was honest when he assessed his season last year. It wasn't what it needed to be. And so I think to come back and have a chance to, make it about the team, which is something that he always is, make sure to emphasize when he's talking about his contract, what he wants to do. Like when he got benched basically that 1 week and, he got asked a lot of questions about it, he was like, I'm about winning. I'm going to do it for the good of the team. So I thought that this always made sense. This was always going to be a place that we can land at. Let's go on to the next two moves that came out today. Deontay Hardy, who I actually texted our insider. I'm a little bit surprised about this, but with the cap number, the more you look into it, we probably should have known that this was a possibility, if not a foregone conclusion, because the Bills are just clearing as much cap space as they can, and they're going to clear almost $5 million by releasing Deontay Hardy, who I thought was, as a returner, everything you could have hoped for last year. I still think there's more meat on the bone for what he could have been in the offense. But listen, 2 offensive coordinators last year. It didn't work out under either of them. You move on from him. You're probably going to try to go out and sign a free agent wide receiver, maybe somebody that Joe Brady has a little bit more of a vision for in his offense. I have no problem with that. You add about $5 million in cap savings. The other move, Neal, longtime special teams ace. You're at a point in this build or this roster construction, you can't afford paying big time money to special teams only players. And that's what Neal has been. That's what Tyler Medikevich has been. Those are going to be UDFAs or day 3 draft picks for the next couple of years.
Yeah, you hit the head on the nail. And before I address that real quick, we do have a super chat, Matt. I wanted to put it up here before we forgot.
Yep.
I'm always going to remember Jordan Poyer waving his finger in Mac Jones's face after the Hyatt interception as he walked to the sideline with his head down. Definitely one of many memorable memories that Jordan Poyer had here with this team. Y-Town's king. Going to be hard to replace him and what he meant to this team, but unfortunately, like we've been saying, it's a new chapter for this franchise and something they're going to have to, try to replace the production that he had. As for the moves that you just mentioned, Deontay Hardy, unbelievable punt return, helped the Bills win the AFC East this season with that return. But like you said, you and I both envision big plans for him in this offense as someone that can stretch the field, someone that could make plays down the field, because he had a history of doing that with the Saints when he was involved, making those bigger plays. But we didn't see that very often. We saw it once in the Jacksonville game. We saw it sporadically here and there, but never anything on a consistent basis. So when they could free up over $5 million in releasing him, it just made too much sense. And you hope that he lands on his feet with a contender that somewhere where he can return and maybe be more involved in the offense. It just wasn't a good fit for whatever reason here in Buffalo. Neal, that's a tougher one because, you mentioned it, special teams ace. He was elite as a gunner. He made some big plays on special teams over the years. When they used him as like a big nickel at times and they line him up against Travis Kelce, he had some success at times. But it also felt like he was a player that when he was on the field playing defense, he'd get penalized a little bit too much. And that kept him off the field on a regular basis. So it just was one of those things where what can you do for me? And if you're not doing enough, it makes sense to release a player like that. And Neal is going to go somewhere and make some team very happy on special teams. He might be able to get involved in their defense. But for Buffalo, this is not what we've seen from them early on when they were trying to have an elite special teams unit year in, year out. I think they know you need to win in today's NFL with an elite offense and a defense that can make big plays down the stretch. Special teams is great, but it might be I don't want to say the least important, but it definitely pales in comparison with those other two. So freeing up all this money, like you said, whether you're talking Deontay Hardy, Neal, Jordan Poyer, the reworked deal of Von Miller, and the list goes on and on, maybe that allows the Bills to go out in free agency and make one move, and not a big move, but maybe it is a Curtis Samuel or a Darnell Mooney at wide receiver where you're like, boy, they have the upside to be a wide receiver 2 in this offense. They can still address wide receiver in round 1 or 2 of the draft and just stockpile those weapons for Josh Allen. But this is what freeing up some of that money does. It might allow you to make one of those mid-level moves and then add in a lot of those depth players that you think are going to fit your system on both sides of the ball. These moves had to be made, though, especially the 2 that you just mentioned.
So I want to get a little bit more into the Von Miller renegotiated deal here and take a look at, the next couple of years, Ryan, because, man, it is still a mammoth of a contract. I mean, they did a restructure last year that definitely complicated things, kicked the can down the road. So you have the original deal that the Bills signed him to. Now you have, what the Bills are kind of on the other end of here over the next couple of seasons. And, the original out was after the 25 season, right? It's a little bit muddy. I mean, looking at this thing right now, if the Bills were to move on, according to Spot Track's numbers, after 2025, he'll have a cap hit next year with this renegotiated contract of $25.6 million. The dead cap hit is still $20.6 million. So that means they'll have to take on $20.6 million in dead cap just to move on from Von Miller after next year. And, I almost feel like if you're Brandon Beane, you got to really hope that this guy turns it around and somehow becomes at least a part of the rotation over the next couple of years, because you're really tied to him. Of course, you could open up $5 million and carry the $20 million dead cap, and I think you get like $12 million in space the next year. But man, it's not over. And I almost feel like the biggest mistake, more so than the initial contract for Von, was extending it by restructuring it and making it even more of a cloudy picture.
Yeah, no, that's a fair talking point. And, we saw this week in Denver with the Russell Wilson release that sometimes teams will just take their medicine and eat dead cap, because Russell Wilson's like $84 million in dead cap space. So 20 million is still a large chunk of change, but there might just come that point in time where Brandon Beane says, hey, this just didn't work out. We have to do that. And, Levi, I see your comment here. I was talking with Matt about this pre-show. I said, I've had so many people texting me or messaging me saying, I can't remember a day like this. I'm like, oh, it was like February of 2000. And on the same day, the Bills released Bruce Smith, Andre Reed, and Thurman Thomas. And, yes, those were all players that were out of their prime, although I think Bruce Smith would say something about that because he was pretty productive still in Washington. But yeah, I mean, a day like that where you release 3 Hall of Famers, this pales in comparison. But in terms of recent memory, this has been a tough day for Bills fans.
Good post in here. After 2025, the dead money shrinks next off season if it's a post June 1st cut. So the dead money there would only be $8 million, and the Bills would get $17.5 million in cap savings. So that will be an option. You can go the Tre'davious White route, but it won't help them necessarily in free agency, the hot part of free agency, just like it's not going to help them, I think, in this year. But let's kind of run through before we end this thing, because we're 37 minutes in. And my hope is, so I've got Disney, Animal Kingdom tomorrow, Magic Kingdom on Friday, and then we come back Saturday, but not till later. Our flight's later in the afternoon. So Ryan and I are going to come back with our free agent episode primer, if you will, for next week on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. So we'll give you another episode of Shout from the vacation. We're dialed in. It's that kind of year. That's what happens when we schedule a vacation this time. You got to be
right around free agency. Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to Saturday's show, but yeah, go ahead, Matt. Let's run through those numbers one more time on the cuts today, the restructures, and the money saved.
All right. So here we go. Like if you go through all of the players, so the 5 that were cut today, Nyheim Hines cut last week, the Connor McGovern restructure, the renegotiation for Von Miller, all of those moves. I think we were like sitting at 46 million over the cap when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, right before the combine. If you look at, according to Spot Track right now, with all the work the Bills did today, and they cleared over 25 million, and this doesn't even count Trey White because that's going to be post June 1st. But what the Bills have to work with next week, they currently sit at the salary cap limit is 255.4 million. Their top 51 contracts total right now is 262.8 million. So they are over the cap by 7.4 million. Now, this is before what is the biggest driver of cap space this offseason. That's the restructure that's coming with Josh Allen. That's going to clear like 23 million right there. So now you're in the green, so you can get into some pretty good cap space to start operating into free agency, and then figure out what your draft class is going to look like maybe next month. But there's other levers they can pull, Ryan. We talked about a Deion Dawkins extension, a Taron Johnson extension, maybe a restructuring of Dawson Knox, although I'm not as high on that move as maybe some people are, because I think then you're committing to that a little bit longer term. When I think if the first time there's an out, you can kind of pivot to Dalton Kincaid. That's something to think about. But there's still other things the Bills can do to create more cap space, but they're in a really healthy spot. I think Brandon Beane has done the lion's share of this thing, and they're at least going to be able to be somewhat active next week and make a couple of moves.
Yeah, and you mentioned the top two, extending a Deion Dawkins or Taron Johnson. They could do something with Matt Milano's deal. There's still so much that they can do that I anticipate. And, Josh Allen, one fell swoop with his contract, Stephon Diggs, if they want to do something there. They could be in a relatively, I don't want to say healthy spot, but a much better spot than I think most fans envision. But today we saw the cost of that. And in terms of all these losses and these major players for this team over the past few years. So tough moves had to be made. For anyone saying the salary cap is not real, we learned today, or fans learned today, it's very much real. And you can keep kicking the can like the Saints have in their history, but eventually it catches up to you. I think ripping the Band-Aid off, which is pretty much what Brandon Beane did today, making those difficult decisions, is better for the health of the team now, but more so importantly in the future.
Ryan, I'm absolutely blown away right now. This is the all-time record, almost 3,500 people streaming live right now. This is one of the coolest days in the history of the Shell podcast, coming to you from Orlando, Florida, and Olean, New York. We are absolutely humbled by your support and your continued, readership, listenership. This has been, really, really cool day. A lot of news. It's a historic day in Bills Mafia.
And some people call Olean the Disney of Western New York. So it's like we're in the same spot.
You know something? I've never heard somebody say that, but I'm going to take your word on it. For Ryan Talbot, I am Matt Parrino. Had to get you guys our initial reaction. We'll obviously have more on the Insider Line all week long. You get a 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month after that. Text 716-528-6727. That's 716-528-6727. Get yourself that 2-week free trial. We'll be talking about all of these moves and what it means over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have you covered all next week for free agency. I'll be at the owners meetings in a couple of weeks as well. Our first probably opportunity to talk to Sean McDermott. We'll see if we talk to him after free agency. Sometimes that takes a little while. But man, the Bills roster looks a lot different. It's going to look even more different next week and obviously in April. For Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.